What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favale coming at you with my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. Before we get started, we've punted on doing this because people don't like hearing it at the beginning of the podcast if they're new. Just subscribe to us already or tell your friends, families, frenemies, acquaintances, random people on the street about this podcast. Apple, Spotify, YouTube, the whole nine. Subscribe across all those platforms. But we are going to get into our next offseason look ahead. We're moving on to the Atlantic Division, and we'll be using, when we talk about the Atlantic Division and the Southwest Division, an opportunity to do our finals wrap-ups with the Celtics and the Mavericks. So nice little timing there for that. First and foremost, though, well, this really isn't most important, but if you're looking for stuff about the new CBA and how it's going to impact some of these teams, we will get into that on an individual basis. But Grant and I did do a quick, couple-minute explainer on some of the restrictions that are going to be kicking in, and to just be mindful of if you are a fan of another team. That's at the front end of the Central Division episode. So go check that out. YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcast, it is up there. Now, the most important question, though, Grant, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing very well. And I should say, we're going to talk about the various second apron stuff. It's kind of inevitable. So you'll absorb some of the rules by osmosis, I would say, as we go through every division. But yeah.
You could also ask us questions by joining our Discord if you're not sure about something that's CBA. The link to that's in the podcast and YouTube description. How's that for segueing?
Way to be solution oriented too. Good job.
Let's begin with the Boston Celtics, though, the NBA champion Boston Celtics, which, I mean, even just before we get into their stuff, I'm looking back on this Celtics season as something that myself and a bunch of other people just overthought. When you look at them on paper, they just clearly had the best team. And yet it felt like a lot of us, myself included, again, harped on certain could-be deficiencies. Would Porzingis remain healthy enough? He ultimately didn't when it mattered, and it also just didn't matter. And then he was healthy enough during the regular season, of course. Was there a playmaking deficit? What about the offensive variance? Those are all questions that were floating around even after they got Jrue Holiday, though that did assuage a lot of my concerns to begin with. But this is just... I think people will look back and say, were they really tested? They faced it. All you can do is play the teams that are in front of you. And I take exception to people that get mad. I was seeing, you're not on social media enough, which kudos to you, where some people weren't happy with how the playoffs ended this year. It felt like there were a lot of blowouts. This is the second straight year that we had a 5-game finals. If that's your thought, I actually think that that's valid. If you wanted more competitive series on actual paper to see, certainly in the finals, we would have liked to have seen it gone longer. I think that's a valid feeling to have. There are people that are clapping back while saying you really need to reevaluate your basketball fandom if you didn't enjoy the regular season, if you didn't enjoy the playoffs. I agree to that to an extent, is that we can't complain about everything. The regular season, it'd be nice if it was shorter. It'd be higher stakes if it was shorter. The regular season is 82 games. If you like basketball, if you want to follow the NBA, you just need to accept that and stop complaining about it. But I also think it's okay to say, yeah, it would have been cool if we had more epic series as part of these playoffs. I still think there were competitive games. There were competitive series. I personally always find enjoyment out of the postseason. Podcasting with you and talking to you, of course, certainly helps. Workshopping podcast titles with you certainly helps that enjoyment. It's just, I'm open to a wealth of opinions that clearly aren't toxic or disingenuous. So that was a takeaway. But the Celtics, just in general, they're a fucking hell of a basketball team. And if you're saying their path was easy, I think we said the same thing about the Nuggets. It's not that you can only play who's in front of you, and there were injuries. So if you want to say their path was easy, I think it's more so there was one generational team in the league this year, and they won the title.
Yeah, that's been when I get asked about it, if it's a radio thing or just, in conversation, that's the thing I'm coming back to is how is it, fine. Everybody likes to enjoy basketball and the NBA and the playoffs on their own terms, but it's I don't understand how you could make the case it's a bad thing that we saw. There was one great, you said this, there's one great team this year. It turned out one, and they operated like a great team the whole time. And we tried to manufacture doubts. The collective, we try to manufacture doubts, try to poke holes, try to concern troll, try whatever it is. And it's just through it all, Boston was basically not threatened the whole season, which to me, the NBA seems to want parity and is getting it. 6 straight championships have gone to different teams now. I like it when there is just a grade A ass kicking, like legit, like you're not touching us champion, because like that's my formative years. We're watching the Jordan Bulls, and like that's like, to me, what is cool about the NBA is when there's just a monster, and that's what the Celtics felt like this year. I don't know that we need to get into like, or I'm not interested really in getting into the whole like, well, how would they have looked in 2017 against that field or whatever like that. When, you know, or even like a couple years ago, maybe there was a case that there were 2 or 3 really great teams. I just think it's cool to me to see a team win 80 games, including playoff wins, and just stomp everybody. And like, yeah, you know, and that doesn't happen that often. So maybe even there's like a rarity component to it that made me enjoy it. I'm not receptive to anybody. You're more like diplomatic about it. I'm not receptive to anybody that's just like shitting on the playoffs. Like that, to me, in my opinion, these playoffs were awesome. We had like surprises. We had teams advance farther than you thought, teams that didn't go nearly as far as we thought. And then you had a dominant champion. Like, what else do you want?
I think maybe you've done a better job actually of adjusting your priors. Where I'll use the Nuggets Timberwolves series as an example. And it was just like, in scope and scale and result, it was an epic series, but like there were just so many games that didn't matter before the game was halfway over that I missed. But I have to continue to get used to. That's part of the 3-point variance. It's part of just what's happening. Like, it doesn't phase me in the regular season, but in the playoffs, I'm not focusing on, oh, I want every series to be Knicks versus Sixers, where it was decided by basically one possession the entire series. So I think it's okay to just look back and lament, like, it would have been cool if this went 7, but we got into this discussion in a mailbag is, well, is it better to have X number of competitive games, or just see what if the series went 7 games, but every single victory is a blowout? So it's just, and this series was different in the sense that like it never felt that the Mavericks had a chance. But what I do lends itself to your point is think about how many people were picking the Mavericks.
Right.
And I actually, did I mention this already on this podcast? When we were picking our finals, I picked the Celtics in 7 because I felt not bullied, but like, oh, I must be missing something. And the more I thought about it, when we officially had to file our picks to Bleacher Report, I went Celtics in 5 with Jaylen Brown as finals MVP, by the way. So there you go. Should have bet on it apparently. But so I enjoyed the playoffs. But like you said, I guess I am a little bit more receptive to it. It'd be cool. I like game 6's game. Like even just think about the discourse had the Celtics have lost game 6. And I don't root for any specific outcome. I root for chaos. That would have been chaos. But now part of the fun is, and this might be a good segue into the Celtics offseason, is how teams respond to this version of the Celtics, where it's not necessarily about replicating what they're doing, because spoiler alert, having 6 players who are all top 50 players in the NBA, that's not something you should replicate so much as everyone should aspire to have as many really good basketball players as possible. But it's okay, they've thrown this punch. How do all these other great teams that lost, like Denver and Minnesota, counter? And if you think that Philly will be healthier, or the Knicks, how do they counter? Even the Mavericks specifically, what do they take away from this? And again, we'll do much more Mav stuff on the Southwest look ahead. So that's part of the enjoyment too for me, is the fallout from it.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I think you're kind of getting us into, you know, really it's more about like what other teams should do this offseason to try to catch up, but we got to talk about what Boston can do. So
which just seems like they don't get to reflect on it at all. It's just, you won the title, and now it's Brad Stevens did say, did you see his quote afterwards? He was like, this is cool, but like those draft workouts tomorrow are going to hit different. And he was clearly joking and people got mad, but it reminded me of, do you remember that Phoenix Suns clip after the game of them working out? And it was like winner's work, and they're doing like quarter way Bulgarian squats. Someone said this on Twitter. They're trainers. I'd like to know the science behind working out after a game. I'm open to that. But like the form on these things, they should have fired every single one of those trainers after that video came out.
Well, we have not seen any video of the Celtics working out post-title, so they're clearly slacking and not going to repeat.
It was also cool though, and I promise it's the last thing on this, but we gave credit to like the Nuggets kind of sticking together even when things weren't working out. We're like less than 2 years removed from people thinking that the Celtics need to bust up Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. And so they did, move the pieces, pretty substantial pieces. They like changed them in and out around them. But like to see these two do it after 7 years together, after people almost trying to paint them or pit them against each other, like that was actually like, that's always a cool moment. It was the same thing with the Nuggets, where it's like they stuck through the injuries. They didn't fire Michael Malone. There was more turnover in Boston, of course, but to see these two guys do it, and where the focus on both of them, I think Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, it's so often on what they're not doing, because I do feel like we fetishize the primary playmaking aspect, and none of these guys, I mean, Jason Tatum, though, in the playoffs with his passing, in the finals specifically, but like they're not Luka, they're not Jokic, and so it's like we tend to gravitate towards those players. Like that's also a cool moment for Boston.
Yeah, I think too, like if you're looking for truisms to take away from the Celtics as champions now, in addition to what you said of like you should try to get the most really good players as possible on a roster, it's that the two-way wing is still the most important player, like that the player type that there is, because they changed everything around, over the course of like, just to say Tatum's 7-year career, they shuffled everybody in and out except for Brown, really. And so like they had two awesome two-way wings and they changed everything except that, and now they have a title. Like that's still true. That is the through line, I think, that has not changed, in light of Boston winning the title. That's always going to be the thing.
Do you think, and this might need to be the extent of, aside of talking about their extensions and any minimum targets you like there's not much, like they're set, like there are things they could do, but like they don't need to go out there. Do you think what they did is, it's not even, I don't want to say replicable, but like they have 4 guys who are not undersized for their positions that can just defend at an above average clip at minimum, put the ball on the floor, hit outside shots off the dribble, have these counters once they get inside the arc. That's just like, yeah, it might have taken them a while to get here, but I still don't even know if we're fully appreciating the anomaly that is the makeup of I would still say, look, Kristaps was important when he was healthy, but like the 4 best players on this roster are just, they're what like every team would actually want, but like you imagineer it in your dreams. It's not something that's supposed to exist in reality.
I always circle back to, I never get the quote exactly right, but Bob Myers a couple of years ago was asked about like what wins in the playoffs, and he was just saying like guys that when you're evaluating them, you almost never say he can't do this, whatever you're talking about. And so it's like, when I got asked about it the other day, it's like, what's so special about this team as a playoff team and as a regular season team? It's like at all times, except for, short stretches of inconsequential parts of the second and early fourth quarter or whatever, all 5 guys on the floor can ably defend their position and other positions. And all 5 guys on the floor, when they get the ball, are threats to pass, dribble, or shoot. And it's just like, that's insanely hard to build, to get 3 guys that can do that. Like Dallas didn't have 3 guys that could do that. It had 2. I mean, and even like, it's only halfway there because neither Luka nor Kyrie are the like able defenders. So like Boston is so far, and by that measure, like Boston's so far beyond every other team, because every guy on the floor was a legit like plus two-way threat. And it's just like, what, I can't remember the last time that was true of a team,
I don't like, is it like is it the Warriors, Kevin Durant era or pre-Kevin Durant era Warriors?
I mean, even Draymond Green is a liability as a shooter. Like,
they lost that year.
Right.
Though,
you're right. Yeah. and not last year, weirdly, but we're getting way too far afield. So we don't need, do we need to go through like all the measure, issues, or not issues, categories, I guess, for Boston that we would with others?
No, I think that, so the highlights are, the notable free agents would be Luke Cornett and Xavier Tillman. And then Sam Hauser has a team option, so they wanted to have someone at a larger number. They could just decline it. They're going to be a second apron team unless they decide to trade one of their core players. So their best spending tool is going to be minimums. And so I think there are 4 quick things about this team and I'll ask this one first, because of life inside the second apron. Would you, as this organization, look at paying Sam Hauser more, or even inflating a deal for Luke Cornett or Xavier Tillman, just to have, if we want to go out and maybe someone gets injured, we attach some first round equity to this salary to bring someone back who'd be part of our rotation? That's an interesting, we know Phoenix is going to do it with Royce O'Neal. There's that is basically done. Is Boston going to follow suit? Would you consider it? Or is it just like, this thing is just so finished? Like, what are they going to do?
Yeah, no, I think that is exactly where I was going to go. It's like, if you're looking for any semblance of intrigue, it's maybe this, maybe it's, how does Boston sort of create optionality where there is none? And it like Cornette is the guy I keep thinking of as like, let's bump that salary up to a number where, because you can't aggregate, you can't take back more than you send out, to where we could trade him with a pick and get somebody, that is a mid-tier salary that might help us a little bit more, because Cornette didn't feature in the playoffs. Like, that's really the extent of the drama here for Boston, is like, it's almost just like, we don't really know yet if that's the quote unquote right move for second apron teams, but it's definitely, if you're looking for ways to continue to add talent in these circumstances, like, that's something I definitely would look at for Boston. I think it's worth the pain of it not working out to just try that.
I'm very much hoping, and I think I mentioned this on one of the previous look aheads we did. I just want one second apron team to do this with a player where the salary is an exact match for another player. So it's like, what if they give Luke Cornette $9,890,000 next year? It's like, well, that's what Alex Caruso makes right down to the cents. Like,
yeah. I was gonna say that. How fun would it be, just to your point, how to speculate, like, to start you immediately? That's a weird number. Let's start looking around the league and see who they're actually targeting.
I would do that just to troll if I was a front office, by the way. Like, you're still keeping your options open. The other two things that I think are quick. So Jason Tatum is eligible for a 5-year, $314.9 million max. It projects. They're going to offer it. He's going to sign it. I think we can just move on.
Done deal.
This one's more interesting. Derek Wright, Grant, 4 years, $122.8 million about is the max extension the Celtics could offer. I was going to frame it more as, would he sign it? But recently I've seen, and I just can't imagine they won't offer it, but people have kind of presupposed that because of the second apron concerns moving forward, that Boston isn't going to necessarily offer it and they'll let it play out. And I think you have to offer it, because there's no way in my mind that he's going to get less per year in his next deal.
I think you have to offer it. And Mike, I'm more towards the side of, like, Willie. The question to me is, will he take that? I think he probably will. I've thought about it a little more since we talked last, just because, I don't know, maybe I'm projecting, but Derek White is a player that seems to be about the quote unquote right things and likes winning, and is smart enough to realize this is a perfect situation and he's never going to find a better one. So forgo whatever, however many tens of millions he might, there's risks in not signing a long-term deal, might be able to get if he plays it out and doesn't accept that offer. I think it's a no-brainer offer from Boston. And then after that, maybe there's some uncertainty as to whether he'll take it, but I think he will.
And I mean, look, the year one salary being like 27.2, 27 point, like, that's a good amount of money. I would predict if he went to the open market, some team would give him more, but would it be for as long? That would be the question.
Yeah.
And then really the only other interesting thing here is, it's not even getting into minimum targets. Just you can name whoever you want for these guys. I mean, like, what do they actually need? And it's probably reserve bigs and maybe a more conventional floor general. And I'm just wondering, is a Monte Morris, can they give him enough playing time to get in a conversation like that? Do they look at a DeLon Wright? If they wanted to, like Gordon Hayward, how much is his market cratered? Do they maybe look at Daniel Tice as a reserve big? I'm curious what ends up being their biggest priority if they're looking to flesh out the rotation or make even upgrades, because I think you can point to it and say, you could argue for either one, but just the Kristaps Porzingis injury, and now he needs surgery on that left leg this offseason, so he's going to miss a few months. Does that increase the urgency for you if you're Boston to be like, not that we need to go out and trade for like a big, but maybe we look at trading for Santi Aldama, which is like, we're trying to find higher end insurance than perhaps people would have initially thought coming off this title.
It definitely, for me, shifts the focus away from the like some of the other listed options, another playmaker or another wing or whatever, like to a big guy. Because if you just have to, whether it's this or some other injury, I think it's reasonable to assume Porzingis will miss time. And Al Horford's a year older, I think, and he's now just coming off an extremely long season. I don't think you want to be taxing him like that. He's someone that I think you probably rest pretty liberally, cut his minutes. And so maybe it's fine if Tillman and or Cornette are just back, and that's how you sop up those center minutes. But I think insofar as they can like be choosy with minimums, I think that's where the focus needs to be, just because both of their main big guys this year, I think we should expect to play less next season than they did this year.
Al Horford's playing more. My God.
Yeah, right. Something's gone sideways, and we need to test him for is his heart like 3 times the normal size that he can handle this in his late 30s?
My favorite offbeat targets for them, if they like, so big man wise, Luka Garza. I know that's sort of a deep cut, but that would be interesting. And I love Santi Aldama for them. The degree to which I've seen a lot of Pacers fans and media kind of think that Andrew Nembhard is like the player that might not fit in long term with Indy rather than a Benedict Mather or TJ McConnell. One, I disagree, and we said as much. Do you know what made me feel better about disagreeing? I bet you can guess. Guess who
What's
else
that?
disagrees?
Who?
Caitlin Cooper.
Oh, the god.
So I'm like, whenever my opinion aligns with Caitlin's before I've heard Caitlin's opinion, it makes me feel so much better about life in general. But like, if Indy was just looking to recoup first round equity because he makes so little, that would be, you imagine him on this team. Do we just pencil them in for another like 8 titles? How does that work out? Like, what?
Yeah, no, I think if they had, no, I cannot imagine Andrew Nembhard on this team. I think
we would have to help out a conference rival, hashtag Milwaukee, not controlling where Drew Holiday ended up. But yeah, that's just like, this team is just, they're ready to win it all again. If everyone's coming, the Porzingis injury does throw an interesting sort of wrinkle into the equation, depending on not just what will he look like when he comes back. Like, is this not like the reality of his career? Is it's been stop and start with injuries. These past 2 regular seasons have been more the exception than the rule.
For sure. Yeah, no, that's why I think you have to plan around that. Let's move to Brooklyn. This is will be much more of a conventional offseason outlook. Just
really? Because they're boring as fuck. I'm
well,
sorry, Nets fans.
I mean, there's more options, I guess, to talk about than we did
if
with
we
Boston.
spend more than 5 minutes on this,
okay,
everyone should subscribe multiple times across multiple platforms because they don't deserve anymore.
Let's run through the conventional preview here. The free agents, they got to think about Nick Claxton. His $18.3 million cap hold is an interesting like over under number, I think, on the next deal he gets. You got Dennis Smith Jr., you got Lonnie Walker, no bird rights on either of those for the Nets. So moving to like what their cap situation is, they can pay Claxton $25 million and still have another 20-ish below the first apron. So in theory, their best spending tool is the non-taxpayer MLE, the full MLE, which is $12.9 million. You could extend Mikal Bridges, you could extend Cam Thomas, Ben Simmons. Just kidding. Will Ben Simmons play a game for the Nets this year?
Oh, I don't like. Well, do empty gym Instagram videos count?
No, he has to actually be on the floor in front of a crowd.
I would say yes, he'll play for them, but they seem like a candidate to do something reckless this offseason because all the reporting of just that they want Mikal Bridges to be their co-star for the next star. It's okay. Well, that star you acquire needs to be better than Mikal Bridges, which is fine, but it's just like, who? Like, it seems like increasingly Donovan Mitchell's not going to be available. And so my point being, Ben Simmons' expiring contract could be a good salary anchor in such a trade. But I just don't know the opportunity that's going to be out there for them. And so, like, is he going to be on the Nets might be the question. I'm just going to say he will be on the Nets and he will play for them next season. That is,
and that contract is just going to expire at the end of the year, and then whatever happens. You think?
You don't think they'll extend him?
No, I mean, like, well, yeah, I guess whatever happens is he doesn't play for the Nets again. One thing, so we can get into like some of their questions and needs, but I do think it's important to note that the Nets are in a little bit of an unusual situation in that like there's not really a lot of upside to them being bad, which takes away an option because they owe their draft to Houston forever and ever because of James Harden. So like it's always fun to me to concoct trades that involve the Nets getting back their picks just because it's nice. It would be nice if they had, some upside to building, to taking like a longer view and maybe eating it for a year or two. But now it's just kind of like you're kind of bullsing it, like you're kind of treading water, and except the Nets might know that this isn't the smartest thing, it's just the best of the available options. But that's just, I think we need to keep that in mind, that as we're thinking of what should the Nets do, it's like, well, one of the things they should do is not really available to them.
Well, but it also is just like, isn't it available? Like, it could be,
but it's not optimal to like a full on tank is like, I don't see the,
I meant like they could have their picks back based on the reporting. Is that I think I saw, I don't know if this was from Michael Scotto or if it came out recently, that the Rockets were willing to give back basically all of the Nets picks in swaps. And it's like, if you had that, especially because one of them is number 3, right? And like that pick is the third overall pick right now. If you can get back your draft, and I don't even know if I'm empathetic. I acknowledge that it's a weird look to trade Mikal Bridges just to get your own stuff back, but like, you got to just wash your hand. Like you made the Harden trade, it's over.
Yeah.
And so I think the needs really quickly. I think they clearly need a floor general. They need a better best player. And that's not a shot at Mikal Bridges. It's, I mean, to be the second or third best player on a really good team, that's still an incredible level to reach here. And I feel like they could use some more like strength and like brawniness up front.
Mm-hmm.
They could maybe use some more just like, shooting that isn't going to be a liability on the defensive end. But, and look, we could get into non-taxpayer mid-level targets, but it's just so hard to do with this team because is there a pathway? So forget about, and I'm sure Nets fans should be frustrated that we're going to continue to talk about, well, they should just trade Mikal Bridges and kind of start over. What is the pathway for them to get to even fringe contention with this group, right? Like, is it you have to believe that Cam Thomas, as you already mentioned, is extension eligible? Is it? Would you feel better? The extension that Mikal Bridges is could sign is like 3 years and what is it, 122, 112, 112. I don't think he signs it. I would offer it because would you feel better about their future if he signs that? Because then it opens up all this flexibility because all of a sudden your best player, who's maybe something like the 30th, 35th best player in the NBA, so that's not ideal, but he's all of a sudden on a contract that ages super well and creates this flexibility. I'm just trying to figure out what could happen this offseason realistically that would make me feel better about the Nets' long-term future.
The more we talk about it, the only thing is getting your draft back from Houston. Like, right? Because here's let's game it out. So we've already said like a significant priority for them is like, well, let's re-sign Nick Claxton. And then you just said, and I agree with you, they need to get a little bulkier up front. So you're going to pay a center a starting salary, whether that's 18 million, whether it's 25, whether it's, I don't think it's more than 25. And you're going to ink him to a new deal. And then your needs are still the same. Like you still need a bit. So like, what does that even look like? You're going to go find like a power forward that gives you all the bulk. Like if that existed, the Thunder would have traded for him by now, like to pair with, and like, you don't even get the stretch. So now this guy also needs your bulky center, your four needs to be able to shoot. Like, so it's kind of, that's just a way of saying like, it's kind of bleak because like, even if they go down the list and tick the boxes of like, okay, got Claxton back and we made use of the MLE. It's like, are we the 9th best team in the East now? Or is that even, is it even that? I don't know. So if you're talking long-term future, like retaining Nick Claxton at like a top 15, top 10 center salary for next year, like that does not make me feel better at all about the team's long-term future. It's like, well, okay, they got a decent starter for next year, but where's the upside in that?
Who is the worst player they could acquire then? Because they do have that future draft equity from Dallas, Philly, Phoenix. So they could make a move. But like, who is the worst possible player? I'll throw some names at you. Let's do it this way. That would make you say, okay, they're a top 6 team in the East. DeJounte Murray.
6?
I'm going to start.
Well, I was going to think.
I'm assuming Bridges
Trae Young first. I think Murray. It's Boston, Milwaukee, Philly, I guess, even though they don't have any players. Indiana, New York. That's 5. Who am I missing that would also be?
Miami might factor in there.
Miami,
Orlando.
Okay, so
Cleveland.
Oh God, yeah. So if it's DeJounte Murray, that's not good enough.
What about? I guess you killed 2 birds here with Donovan Mitchell. Would be, well, you kind of right. Like you weaken the Cavs.
Yeah, that's the move. You have to pull somebody away from one of those teams that's definitely ahead of you right now in the hypothetical 24-25 East standings. Mitchell might do it. Mitchell might be good enough for that, I think, to get into
but like that, if he would have never gotten injured, he might have been second team all NBA. And so like, that's the guy you're getting. And we're still saying, we're not sure if they're a top 6 team in the East. So it's almost like I could throw Trae Young at you, but is the answer kind of going to be the same?
Yeah. I think I'd rather have Mitchell, and we're not even sure about Mitchell. So Trae Young, I guess the answer is no for Trae Young. If it's like, does he get them into top 6?
Darius Garland, the answer would certainly be no, right?
Yeah, gotta be.
What about LaMelo Ball?
So still no, but that's a little more interesting, right? Because you're okay now. We've got some long-term upside. Although Garland isn't really like that much older, but I think LaMelo has
he has the higher ceiling. Yeah.
By virtue of not playing basically for the last 2 years, he still has like, well, I don't know, how good might he be? We don't have answers yet. So that's like a positive, weirdly, in this case.
Yeah. So I mean, and in terms of if they're just content to kind of stay the same and futz and fiddle with their non-taxpayer MLE. I mean, I think Tyus Jones gets more, but that's a name. Do they take a flyer on Fultz? I wouldn't give him the MLE, but like, how much does Jonas Valanciunas cost if you're looking for a different look up front? Buddy Hield, Caleb Martin, Kyle Anderson, all those guys are D'Anthony Melton. Even this is a team. Look, their defense was kind of disappointing too relative to their personnel. It's like, what does Isaac Okoro get? I tend to think he'll get more than the mid-level. I think you said he could be right around there. He's restricted. How does that factor in? D'Anthony Melton might be of interest to this team, but like, all those names are just, I really do hate framing an entire team's existence this way, but you said it, like, you're kind of bullsing it right now. You just have more, I guess you could say they have more draft equity, but they don't have their own draft equity until 2028. So
yeah. All right. Well, that's probably our 5 minutes there. We got a slightly more interesting. I kind of want to just turn you loose on the Knicks. They're our next team.
This could be its own podcast because of how many different avenues they can explore. But OG Anunoby has the player option. I don't know if you saw the report that he's apparently unhappy with the Knicks' offer, which is interesting. It could just be posturing at this point, but what are they coming in at? Is it just maybe they won't offer a 5th year? So I'm very curious about that. Isaiah Hartenstein, early bird free agent. You've heard us say this multiple times, but they can't offer him more than his max is like 4 years, $75.5 million. Precious Achiuwa is restricted, Alec Burks, and then Bojan Bogdanovic has $2 million of his $19 million salary guaranteed. Their salary cap situation and getting into their best spending tool, it's just completely fluid. If you pencil in Anunoby for his max salary, which is $42.3 million, and then Hartenstein for his max salary, which I think is like $16.2 million, the Knicks are all of a sudden right at the tax line. That's without fully guaranteeing Bojan Bogdanovic's deal. If they do that, they're then brushing up against the second apron with him on the books. And that's like, they could dump other salary to increase flexibility, but now you're getting into a weird space of, okay, we have to, it's not just if you aggregate, if they want to make a bigger trade or a trade at all and aggregate players, sending out 2 players in the same deal or more, you're like, well, we have to stay under this second apron now. So to just have less wiggle room under that is something they need to consider. So I honestly think like their best spending tool and is probably the mini MLE, if that, just because if it's more, you've probably lost Isaiah Hartenstein or Anunoby. And so I would be shocked if they lost both of them. I feel least confident for them in Hartenstein's return. So I don't know where they're going to end up at, and this gets into, there'll be the other notes. So extensions that you should think about. Jalen Brunson could sign a 4-year, $156.5 million max extension. I would wait if I was him because he gets so much more money in free agency. There is some reporting that suggests he would consider it. We both land on the same page with this, I know, so I'll blow past it. I don't think he signs it. Julius Randle's eligible for a 4-year, $181.5 million extension. I'm not offering that. I'm not even sure if I'm extending him if I'm the Knicks. I know he's valuable to them. I know he's a useful player. But when you're talking about wiggle room beneath the second apron, or one of their needs is they need an upgrade from their second best player. I don't know where you necessarily want it to come from, but it's, if you think Jalen Brunson is the guy, that's perfectly fine and valid. Julius Randle is not like that. That's not doing it unless you think he's going to completely revamp his playoff resume. And I just, the sample size is small, so who knows what's going to happen with that. Even before we get into needs, the question here needs to be, for me, is twofold. Is this their last best chance of getting a big name, getting that better second best player, or maybe even a best player? And if the answer is no, how do you structure your books moving forward so that you're not leaping in to, because when you're thinking about new contracts or salaries for Brunson and Randle, that's part of the second apron concerns. And so this year avoiding it is just like, yeah, you could do it. It's fine. But beyond this year, it gets super difficult.
So this is the crux of their offseason to me. I think you mentioned, they have to play this right, because I don't think the offseason is their last chance. It might be this trade deadline though. So it's so critically important that they preserve the ability to aggregate salaries. One, because that's the way they get the player you're talking about, a better second best player, maybe even a better bet. I mean, it's hard to be a better best player than Brunson. He was just like one of the 5 or 6, most valuable guys in the league.
It's also relative to the trade market, because you could even say, who is the person that's gettable, that's No, that's appreciably better than Julius Randle.
Right. Well, and here's the thing, why it's so critical for them to be able to aggregate. They're like built to aggregate, because if you throw let's get our second best guy. Well, Julius Randle's cap figure is just under 29 million. That's not enough, I don't think, unless you really luck out to get the guy we're talking about. So you're going to have to throw in like one of their other mid-tier, like Mitch Robinson's at 14. You've got Josh Hart at 18. Not saying they'll trade any of these guys, but there's all these. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 guys from 11 to 19 million that, and then in addition to Randle at 29. So they've got the tools to aggregate. Plus they have enough draft equity to be competitive if it's that type of offer. So like, if you remove that option from them, that it weirdly feels to me like it costs them more than it does a lot of other teams, just because like we agree they need to go get a guy like a capital G guy. And if you hamstring yourself then by getting into a salary position where you're prevented from aggregating, like how do you get them? Like how do you get up to the number it's going to take to get the $42 million guy or whatever it is? Like, it's just, you kind of take that option away. So you may know this, but like, and maybe you said it, sorry if you did, but like if Hartenstein and Anunoby are back at their max figures, are they still going to be able to aggregate using other guys? Or is that off the table now? Because that would change my opinion on how much I'm willing to offer someone as important as Hartenstein or Anunoby.
It would really just like, they're going to be right up against the second apron if they bring Bojan back. That's with their first round picks. So I think to me, this is where it's their last best chance to get that player without having to eat into that happy-go-lucky core. That like, if you want to get that guy without giving up DiVincenzo or Hart or Mitchell Robinson or Hartenstein or Anunoby, all those guys, right now there might be some collateral damage unless you aim lower. But like, this is the thing I'm thinking of because of everything that you said, and something I've considered a little bit more is because of the concerns moving forward. And like, because you could even say like, you can't even roll over. You could say maybe we roll over Bojan Bogdanovic's salary slot and trade for someone else, but you're still going to run into those second apron concerns as these guys are on new deals. And so I'm not advocating for the Knicks to rush into something and say, player X, DeJounte Murray's available. That's not a great fit with the but we just need to go get somebody. Do they need to be more open to the idea of, I don't know what's playing in the background for me. I couldn't see if you hear that. I apologize. But like getting someone who is cheaper, clearly below that level, but might still crack, if not their closing lineup, then the top 6 or 7 of their rotation. And I'm going to use this player. I have 2 players as an example here, where you go and you can, by the way, the thing that they could do is you can restructure the guarantee on Bojan Bogdanovic's deal. So it's, if you want to get, let's use Alex Caruso as an example. You can guarantee $10 million for Bogdanovic and then trade him to Chicago in an Alex Caruso deal. And then you look at Alex Caruso as, all right, he'll cost more money next year, but if it's like a 4 for $72 million deal or whatever, that again, maybe it makes it easier to trade someone else. You're still going to have to eat into your quote unquote core, or Denny Avdia, someone who's cheaper already on a long-term deal. If he's available, you just overwhelm the Wizards with picks and the Bogdanovich salary slot. Do you think that needs to be a more viable route for them? Because you're then keeping Randle, and it presupposes that, it doesn't even presuppose, but you're banking on either this core is enough if we just kind of futz and fiddle on the margins or make, I'll call them semi-substantial additions to the meat and potatoes of the rotation, but you're also kind of biding your time still for, yes, it'll cost us more player equity when the time comes, but we're still have the aggregative salary if we need to go out and get that bigger name. And we'll just deal with, if we have to dump money to stay under the second apron, we will deal with that when the time comes.
I think that is like a legitimate way to go. I guess how you feel about that approach depends, or is very much related to who the guys are that you think they could go out and get this offseason. And I know we've talked a little bit about Paul George as like a super long shot, but ridiculously appealing option. Like, if you actually had a chance to get Paul George, I think the more measured approach you're talking about is like, well, I don't know, because it's Paul George. But like of the realistic big swings they could take, I don't know how you feel, but I'm not like in love with really any of them.
I'm not even in love with giving Paul George that, because now all of a sudden you're okay, you avoid the second apron this year, but now you're just like, that's the territory you have to live in, like moving, because that number is so high.
Right. So I value your opinion on this. So I want to know, like, do you think the Bogdan, like messing around with the guarantee number on Bogdanovich and going and quote, I guess, like thinking smaller, is that the best way to go given the options that are realistically out there right now? Or would you still prefer to see them, I mean, whoever it is, like take a big shot?
Based off the trade market right now, I probably prefer that route with Bogdanovich, especially because you're not because it would be easier to say, well, if they could just access the non-taxpayer mid-level, like you're probably, if you're doing that, you're really assuming that OG or Hartenstein are going to be making less than they can be paid. And maybe they will. I've seen a lot of Knicks film schools use like 35 million as the number for Anunoby. And I'd go over on that. Like, I just think because Philly would give him a max, OKC would carve out the room necessary to give him a max, Detroit would give him a max. If he signs for less, I mean, good for the Knicks. And I think their front office has earned the benefit of the doubt, but just from a pure flexibility standpoint, like, and just relative to what's out there, like I'm looking at, and maybe it's maybe it's a $19 million player, or you could take back some more money with Bogdanovich, or you can aggregate different types of salaries. Is Deuce McBride being attached here? I like the idea of setting their sights lower, and then you just have to grapple with the reality of, well, we're going to need to do X if it comes time to aggregate next year or the year after, and we'll have to figure it out. But I do think a part that people just aren't considering is that Julius Randle's next deal, or might just be the number, and that people have kind of baked him into their core moving forward. And I'm just not sold on them reaching the level they need to with him being that guy. So like, if you're going to extend him, as long as it's not a toxic deal, or like if he's at a number of 30 million or something, like that gives you a pretty good starting, like a really good salary anchor. That's more than you mentioned the guys between 11 and 18, which you're not getting a star with just one of those dudes. No. Julius Randle's money on this deal, or more likely the next one, on its own can bring back star money, most likely. So, and then you grease the wheels with picks from there. I'm open to that. And it's not even because I necessarily believe this team could win the title. If you put Denny Avdia on this team, or Alex Caruso, do I think they're a contender? Sure. But like, I don't think they're in the same class as the Celtics, but I don't even know what I'm going to say if they got Paul George or someone else. So I think they need to go the route of thinking a little bit more conservatively, but like, it can't be to the point of we're just running it back, because that's what this team is, in a weird area where that big time trade isn't out there, but like, you still need actual things. And I know people harp on a backup point guard. It just needs to be someone who puts defenses in rotation. It doesn't need to be a point guard size player. You have, like, there might not be minutes. Like, you actually need bigger wings or more front court depth when you look at the size of their quote unquote wings in DiVincenzo and Josh Hart, those guys. So their ideal offseason to me at this point, again, this is just based off what we know about the trade market right now, is unless you can get Mikal Bridges, like, if you could get Denny Avdia or Alex Caruso, like that might just be or even Ayo Dosunmu. Like, that's a guy who's even more cost controlled for 2 more years and helps you out in a variety of different ways, even though he's also on the smaller end if you're looking for a wing. I've come around to that idea of how the Knicks should approach their offseason.
Slight backtrack. So between the reporting that Anunoby is maybe not happy with the current offers, and the reporting coming out today that Pascal Siakam is going to re-sign with Indiana for 4 years and 189, just under 190, which was the 4-year max for Indy, which is what I was like okay with when we were discussing it. It didn't get the 5th year because, for among other reasons, Indiana did not have to offer it to have the market beating offer. Do you think OG is trending that way, where it's going to be the Knicks have to be the team that if it's 4 years, it's got to be the max because someone else is going to offer their 4-year max? And that's just the, I don't know, binary nature of it. It's going to be either or. Either he's getting it from the Knicks and it's a little bigger, or he's getting it somewhere else and he's leaving. Do you think that's where we're headed with this?
Maybe. The only thing that would throw a curveball here is that, are we seeing sort of a come to Jesus moment in the new CBA in terms of the barrier for 5-year maxes or even outright maxes is now higher? And so you look at someone like OG, who is one of the most valuable defenders in the NBA. But given his injury history, some of his offensive limitations, you're less inclined, even if you have the cap space or think you're a contender, to give him, like, even Philly would be an example where it's, they have all this cap space, they have Maxey, they have Joel Embiid, plug Anunoby in there. You kind of have the nice balance of the 1-3-5 type deal. But because he's not a caps lock star, and because of how punitive or restrictive going into these aprons can be when it comes to making trades or upgrades, are you going to second guess? And it's not just, maybe OG Anunoby ends up being a good litmus test for this, but this is something a bunch of other guys run into, where it's like, think about Hartenstein and Malik Monk, where it's, well, yeah, someone will give them like more than their early bird rights can get. Well, if Anunoby's not going to get the max, are those guys going to, like, or is Malik Monk really like 476 a no-brainer guy? To me, no. So that would be but I do think your point is probably more accurate, that it just kind of seems like this is either posturing to make sure the Knicks give him the max because there'll be other offers out there to where he will leave if they're not putting the max on the table, which, by the way, would be fairly foolish on their part if they weren't prepared to pay him the max after giving up Emmanuel quickly for him.
Yeah, and saying that, I think I love Anunoby as much as anybody. I don't feel great about him on a max for some of the reasons you said, and I don't think the Knicks should either. But that just, it's funny, the Monk situation, Hardenstein, Anunoby, Siakam to some extent. It's just like, I always view those through the prism of, and maybe this is like telling on myself, of like, as the team that has those guys, I'm just worried. I'm like anxious. So it's like, oh my God, someone's going to offer this crazy number. But then if you think about, just to use Monk in Orlando, it's like, is Orlando really going to do that? Are they really going to beat that number? Like, I don't know.
Even the Paul George stuff, where it's, if he doesn't end up, and maybe because Philly's sort of looming and they see more, and he could have more ball skills than Anunoby, even though he's older. But it's like, I'm really watching this offseason, and I'll be just flat out outright, we're fucking great at what we do. That's just a fact. But my feel for this offseason is very poor because of all these restrictions creeping in. And they're not like, they're restrictions that are creeping in, but like, you're not going to actually have to operate for most of these teams. Okay, Phoenix is living it. Boston is living it. Minnesota, maybe Milwaukee's living it. But a lot of these other teams are trying to think 2, 3, 4 years down the line as well. And I'm very curious to see, there's all these different free agents where it's, okay, these guys should have markets, but will they be as lucrative as you would expect them to be? So I really think that this is going to be a defining offseason on how we view not even just sub-stars, but like stars who aren't in the, okay, they're 22 to 27 years old or 28 years old, where it's just, no, those guys are no-brainer maxes. We move on. I don't know if Anunoby ends up on less than the max yet. You feel a lot better about it, but is the alternative letting him walk for nothing? Like, you can't replace, he is is the second most irreplaceable player on this team. Like, it's just, it's a fact, right?
Yes. And when you frame it that way, like, I'm talking about how anxious I am about having him back on the max, I would be a lot more anxious about losing him for nothing. So like, I mean, there's a couple that's not, I mean, again, and the Knicks signed up for this. So like, they should, it's interesting that some of the reporting, as you mentioned, is suggesting like, oh, maybe they're a little farther apart. Like, you guys needed to have this hammered out, or like a pretty firm understanding of what it was going to take to keep him.
Well, it's like when the Pacers traded Siakam and it got done. And so the fact that it hasn't with Anunoby is a little bit weird, but it's also just like, I do think their front office has earned the benefit of the doubt with this stuff. And people, I'll say nationally, because I'm sure Knicks fans have thought more about this, need to just pull back from this idea that, yes, it might be the last offseason for them to acquire a big name without eating into like this core that the Villanova Cats guys, and like not having to include Mitchell Robinson in a trade. But the front office was likely prepared for that. And when you're bringing in big names, it takes good stuff to get good stuff. And so this is the reality where if it's 2 years down the line and, well, man, we really had to trade Dante DiVincenzo or even an OG Anunoby, like, that's just something you need to do if you're trying to compete at the level they're competing, and to get a player that brings you there without question, that's something you need to be prepared to do. And if that guy's not out there this year, it'd be more ideal and easier for them to navigate it if that player emerges this offseason. But I fully believe that the front office, they're not just going to be like, well, we need to get Paul George or Karl Anthony Towns because Isaiah Hartenstein left. Like, it's just, I don't think they're going to react that way. And so I actually think the more likely outcome, I don't know if it's better, I want to make that clear. The more likely outcome is the names that we've been banning about trade-wise is, oh, they got Caruso, or I really don't think the Avi is available. He is so good. I don't know if people outside Washington know how good Avi is. People in Oklahoma City know how good he is because we've been trying to get him to Oklahoma City for like 6 years. But like a Caruso or a Desunu, like those are guys that they don't materially change what you're doing, but you're a better team after them. And you haven't, probably based off what you had to give up to get them, you haven't punted on your long-term assets there. Yeah. Like that could get you the big name down the line. It just gets harder to navigate the salary cap while doing it.
I think too, my last thought for them is that, I think it's reasonable for the Knicks themselves and for their fans to be confident that, just addressing like the idea of like, oh, we're going to have to give up some of these guys that we've fallen in love with over the last like 18 months or maybe even less than that. Like, I think now the Knicks have shown that they can go find, it's not like Dante DiVincenzo was this before he got to New York. And it's not like Josh Hart
he was going to hit that many threes. Yeah.
Right. It was just like several guys so it's a testament to talent identification. It's a testament to culture. It's a testament to coaching, and those will be constants. So I think the Knicks should feel good about finding like the next versions of those guys. So what really maybe that means is like, it just validates the pursuit of the type of player that is great all the time, everywhere, because they can go find the guys that, situationally for us, we make them really good. We'll just do that again. What we can't do because of our culture and our coaching and whatever is like create someone that is, throw out the superstar of your choice. That is just, he doesn't matter what the circumstances are. So maybe that just kind of nudges them more towards like, we need to be very comfortable with giving up on guys who we view as core pieces that really aren't, that we turned into guys that look like core pieces. So that's just, we're just like, sucking up to the Knicks at this point. So maybe we should stop.
Well, I have two quick things. One's a question for you, but one's something I think they should consider. So you have 24 and 25 in this year's draft. Actually, I guess it's two questions. If you could give that to Brooklyn and get back Phoenix's 2025 pick, what is more valuable to the Knicks is like both from a team building perspective, but also in a trade? I would think having the mystery box of Phoenix's, because look, we make jokes about Phoenix, that could end up being a bottom 5 pick next year, but people like the draft better. So if you could give up that to get an asset that would do more for you in trade / if it doesn't, at least you have access to a better draft class. My stance is I think that's something they should consider doing. Is I know some people want to see them get a cost-controlled guy. They traded Quentin Grimes. They traded Emmanuel quickly. They want to see them replenish the pool. Tibbs isn't playing whoever they get. Like, you just think about what it took for Emmanuel quickly to even see the floor. Like at first, he forced his way there. And then Deuce McBride was like super breaking case of emergency. And it just turned out they needed him. So that was one. And then the actual question I have for you, though, and that might be the place to finish, is what would you prefer what should the Knicks prefer? Is it just waive Bogdanovich and let's say that allows you access to the non-taxpayer mid-level exception? Or is it guaranteeing Bogdanovich to then, because yes, you can use the mid-level exception to acquire players via trade, but there's no wiggle room. It's $12.85 million. That's all you could take back. With Bogdanovich, that number is, you could even guarantee, you could let's just use the $19 million number. Like if you could restructure it so that it's guaranteed for $15 million or something. What makes more sense to you? Is it keeping the Bogdanovich number in some form, and we're just assuming they're not getting a star is my point. Or is it, no, we should just get rid of him. And if you can access the bigger MLE, like that's the better path for you.
I think I might prefer, this is maybe just kicking the can down the road. I think I'd rather mess around with Bogdanovich, whether maybe I guarantee all of it and I just have a $19 million trade chip or whatever. I like the possibilities that gives you. And part of what's like a factor there is I just don't know who I love for them at the mid-level. This offseason.
I have a name.
Okay. Maybe this will change my opinion.
Najee Marshall.
Yeah.
You don't want to blow up like your big term plans for Najee Marshall, but that would be and it's a lot of it's, I'm assuming that Hartenstein and OG Anunoby are both going to be back. Like that's where my brain is at. But if one of them leaves, it's all of a sudden, like, should they be trying to sign or trade for, should they be trying to trade for Robert Williams III, or should they enter the Jared Allen sweepstakes? That's what's tough about their offseason. But assuming those two are back, even if you're telling me they could get Najee Marshall, I'm still keeping the Bogdanovich number because I think it opens more options for you. And ultimately, because of what they need offensively, if you're not going to add that over the offseason because of the lack of optionality, Bogdanovich's scoring and shooting could still end up being a pretty big deal for you.
And I like that paired, especially with Phoenix's 2025 first. If you because then we're just trying to make Avdia happen. So you got that 19, you got a first, you maybe throw another one,
Could
you get it done.
Think about how nasty the Knicks would be defensively if it was Robinson or Hartenstein at the 5, and then you have Avdia and Anunoby just rounding out your front court, and then is Josh Hart your 2? Run out Deuce McBride at the 1 and just play all defense at that point.
Tibbs, don't tempt Tibbs with the to just take Brunson off the floor and have 5 awesome defenders.
Would Caruso very quickly give you any pause? I mean, he can guard up, but it's kind of like, well, we just have another dude who's not a wing size, but we're just going to count on him as defending up through wings.
I have no problem with Alex Caruso on
me neither, but I just wanted to see if I could.
No, I'm on board with that. Shall we go to the Sixers here? This might be quick. I don't know how to view this. So Dan, do you know who the 76ers notable free agents are?
No, could you tell me?
I'll stop you, everyone. So basically the way I keep framing this, and I'm sure you do it too when you're writing about the Sixers, is Joel Embiid is the only person on the 76ers payroll that has guaranteed no questions asked money coming to him next season. Blank slate otherwise, basically. Now Tyrese Maxey's getting his max in restricted free agency. But unless you are dead certain that Paul Reed and Ricky Council IV, who I couldn't pick out of a lineup. But I just know that he's someone that might, what is it, a team option or a partial guarantee, whatever it is.
Yeah, it's a non-guaranteed deal.
Those are the other 2 guys you just brush over when you're talking about the Sixers payroll commitments for next year. So I guess we should just be thorough here. Nick Batum, DeAnthony Melton, Kelly Oubre Jr., Kyle Lowry, Tobias Harris, Buddy Hield, Robert Covington, KJ Martin, campaign, all free agents of one stripe or another.
And I will say Oubre and Lowry are noteworthy just because unless they're coming back for the minimum or the room exception, like you're going to need, like you don't have bird rights on them. So it's not like you're going to have to like cut into your cap space or one of your exceptions to keep them.
And so we probably should at some point talk about like which, if any of those guys, or maybe just tier it out. Like,
do you think I had them projected for, I think they're going to keep Ricky Council. And if you're including their own first round pick, I feel like $60 million about is the cap space that they will decide to end up operating with, just because they can get up a little higher than that. But it's, well, we haven't beat Maxey, we'll keep Ricky Council and then the number 16 pick. Maybe some people want to say, well, Paul Reed should just come back, and so that lowers it by $7 or $8 million. That's even a stupid question, because it's like the scenario that's out. I mean, this is the entire Sixers offseason. It comes down to 2 questions: who is the best player you can get with this flexibility, and is it happening via free agency or trade?
Mm-hmm. And like that's where maybe this is where you talk about like who's so the free, like LeBron James technically might be a free agent. Paul George might be a free agent, could also trade for Paul George. Like after that, it's like, who out there are you definitely going to spend a max on? I'm trying to
say OG, but
the Knicks probably aren't saying that right now. So, but yeah, like it's an interesting, it's such I cannot remember the last time a team had an in prime MVP and then just like the flexibility to do whatever you want. And it's kind of unfortunate that the Sixers, like they can't take a gap year. They sort of seemed like they were doing that this past year. Can't do that this year, but the 25 class is just going to be better. They got to just make the most of this. So, I mean, like, really this conversation needs to be about, do you just do it for Paul George? Do you talk to him, get him to opt out, sign him? Do you trade for him? And then after Paul George, you're not getting LeBron. LeBron's going to go back to the Lakers. James Harden is another prominent free agent. Pretty sure James Harden's not going to go back to the Sixers. Feel fairly confident there. So it's just like, do you do after, and then if it is Paul George, what then? Are you going to go try to see if you can put a number out there that will get KCP from the Nuggets? You
won't even have the cap space to do that if you max out Paul George.
Well, you could still have, like, I guess you got to consider the other roster spots, but like you could get up to like 20, right? Can't you?
If you max out Paul George, they're probably looking at like,
is he starting at 50?
Yeah, like he's around that number. So it's just that obliterates everything.
Yeah. So do you even go for Paul George? Like, do you?
Well, it does feel like their ideal offseason might be, okay, we signed Paul George. Kelly Oubre Jr. comes back on the room exception, and then we're able to keep, let's say, like Lowry and maybe even Batum are willing to come back on minimums. And you would still have some cap space to play around with, but like, could they go out and throw enough picks at Chicago that Alex Caruso is using up the rest of that cap? I'm just ballparking these numbers now, but like, if you can't get Paul George, like what is the move there? I think that becomes a separate twofold question of, but for me, it's Paul George or bust. I would max out Anunoby. I just don't. I guess I just don't buy that he's leaving the Knicks. Maybe I should. Perhaps I'll look back on that. And so it's, what are you, if you don't get Paul George, who really should be like plan A through C at this point, what is the move? Because you're not going to ever have this much cap space again because of Maxi's number. And so are you trying to go out and still sign who? Like, you're trying to get into like the Caleb Martin business, the Malik Monk business? Are you trying to then rebuild or retool your roster through trades? And you're looking at Bogdan Bogdanovic. You're looking at Alex Caruso as a name that I'm sure will come up. Are you trying to get the Nets to trade you Mikal Bridges? But then here is the issue with them. If they strike out on the Paul George thing, if shit needs to happen via trade, teams in most cases don't just want draft picks back. If you're talking about an Alex Caruso or a Bogdan Bogdanovic, okay, sure. But if you're trying to get a Mikal Bridges or a Larry Markkinen, or even if you want a Brandon Ingram, like, those teams want more than picks. The Sixers only have picks. Like, it's cap relief and picks are their best trade offers. And so if you miss on Paul George, it almost feels like, well, you're not getting a star like that, which is fine, I guess. But what are you pivoting to? It's just it's funny. They have so much flexibility that I'm not saying it's damning, but it is damning for our discussion, because you can't make it central to any path, because there are so many different ones that not only are available, but that they could be forced to be directed down.
Well, and it's damning too, I mean, in a certain way, because, like, I guess maybe we shouldn't underestimate, like, one, the ambition, and two, the creativity of Daryl Morey. Like, there's a million moves he's thought of and gamed out that we won't mention here because we haven't. But the expectations are, because you got Joel Embiid and 60 plus million in cap space. Expectations are like, you're getting someone awesome, and then, there's all this other room and flexibility. And it's like, it's hard to concoct a scenario where the Sixers offseason meets those expectations. And like, realistically, like, even like you said, even if you get Paul George, like, suddenly it's the subsequent moves are kind of underwhelming. It's not
like, who can you get for the room exception, and then you got to hit on your minimums. I mean, you'll have like a tiny bit of cap space. I mean, but that would be the ideal, is room exception, Paul George. Are you able to, I haven't done the math on this because it was something we just like, you could, I assume you could get to a point where you have enough cap space to sign Paul George, acquire Alex Caruso if you're not taking back any other money. You have your room exception, and then it's just, okay, so what do we just name? Those three players: Paul George, Caruso, room exception, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, Ricky Council the fourth, still on the books in this scenario. And it's like, you really need to hit on, maybe Kyle Lowry comes back for the minimum, and so you actually have 6 guys that you could depend on. Like, that's not, when Joel Embiid is on your team 6 deep, that ain't enough.
Yeah. I mean, does it make sense we haven't mentioned, like, Jimmy Butler's another trade candidate, but he presents a lot of the same problems George does with respect to, there goes your cap space, basically.
It would not shock me though if the Heat were a team that's like, yeah, we'll take the picks and the cap relief, and we don't need.
But that, from the Sixers perspective, that's just like, well, we're running into the same issues of, like, how do we make another big move with this salary on the books? Like, is the move maybe then you try to trade for a Bridges or a Markkinen or someone that's, down there in the high teens or low 20s salary wise, and then you can go throw money at the KCPs and Malik Monks, or maybe or whatever. Like, so then, you're not getting the $40-50 million player. You're getting a handful in the, 15 to 25 range, like a plus Maxey, because you've got your 2 best players. Like, realistically, unless you get Paul George, who your 2 best players are. It's going to be Maxey and Embiid. So maybe you go and find a bunch of guys that are like in contention to push Maxey for that title of second best, or maybe a couple of those, and then you're filling out the roster that way. That feels kind of unambitious. Although, as I'm talking about it, it's like Embiid, Markkinen, Maxey, and then you maybe somehow get KCP. Like, I'm more intrigued by that than Paul George, and then you're using the room.
Marketing would be so ideal because you're getting him at the $18 million number where it's, oh,
Exactly.
do they still just have $40 million in
Right.
cap space after getting Larry Marketing?
I mean,
it almost feels like that would be preferable. Let's get someone who ends up being our third best player on a sub max, because Paul George might be their third best player, but the problem is Paul George is going to be on a max deal.
Right.
And it feels like that would almost be preferable. But I really do think the problem is because you don't have players to trade, these teams aren't looking to move Bridges or Markkanen, and you don't have the assets to sway them to, in all likelihood, to me. But I take your point, and that might be the overarching question, and I only have one more question on them, is do you prefer the path of Paul George, room exception, a little bit more of cap space? Like, we're talking could be sub 10 million. So you use that in a trade, whatever, and then a bunch of minimums? Or is it, what if you could get, what if you got KCP, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Alex Caruso, and then you're bringing some of your other players back. They're like Nick Batum is back, Kyle Lowry's back, Kelly Oubre's back. Like, which of those routes do you prefer, where you're still you're consolidating into a max plus maybe, let's say, two other semi-notable additions? Or is it like, what if they just got like 4 to 6 just impact players? They're clearly not stars, but all of those guys could be candidates to be a part of the closing lineup of a competitive team.
I think I've if you'd asked me this a week ago, I would have said, just get Paul George and let's figure the rest out. I'm much more amenable now, I think, talking to you about it, with like I don't know if it's the more conservative path, but like you're diversifying a little bit. I think the second way is more appealing to me. And look, like, depending on how you play it, those are guys you could flip when other options become available. Although, like, you're probably sacrificing a lot of your picks if you're trading for one or two of the guys we've mentioned. But if you're just signing, maybe if Philly goes out and signs like 3 of the best non-superstars in free agency, maybe then you can still, step up to at the deadline or whatever to like some new guy becomes available that isn't available now, and you still have the ammo to trade for that guy.
Yeah, I mean, like, there are worse out because but if you're not giving up, like, if you just burn your cap space on some combination of Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, Caleb Martin, I'm contractually obligated to mention Najee Marshall for every single team that I like. And so, like, if you're just getting like 3 of those types of those exact 3 would be perfect, by the way. But like, if you're just getting 3 of those level of players, and like, in addition, you'd still have the room exception, you might have the flexibility to bring back some of your own guys. It like, not just instead of hoping Kelly Oubre Jr. stays for the room exception or hoping Nick Batum doesn't retire and comes back for the minimum, you could pay them a little bit more. It does make it easier because you haven't given up your picks to then make a consolidation trade down the line, rather than funneling it into that one primetime acquisition now, Paul George, who's just on the older end. I will say, if you told me, though, that you could get Paul George and then through picks and were able to get Alex Caruso, I'd probably pick the Paul George route. I think Paul George, Caruso, the room exception, plus Embiid and Maxey, you know what? Fuck your depth. I'll go with that.
We'll figure it out later. Yeah. I mean, it's one of the most interesting off seasons of any team, just because
they're singularly most interesting.
Just like they don't have any players.
My last question on them, though, is so Embiid is extension eligible, 3 years, about 193.5 million. Are you offering?
Yeah.
And is he taking?
Well, yeah, he should. I mean, don't you think? I think it's a yes.
I hate that I feel this way about one of could be the 5 best players in basketball. I'm just like, I don't know, man. Like, we're getting into him for over $60 million a year with his injury history. I understand that he's like a fate shifter, fate creator, but he's just never even a semblance of healthy when it matters most for you. And just that risk, I guess you have to offer it, because the alternative is let's just say you don't offer it. And then, so next year, what are you going to have to go 4 years out? So like, almost getting him on the 3 year, it like shrinks your window of risk.
And I think too, just from everything we've ever heard him say, Daryl Morey is all about like, what's our top 5% outcome? Like, I'll deal with all the risks and like that come with that. For Embiid, there are more than almost anybody else for downside risk, right? But like, I think the way that Morey would view it is, if like, it's an if, everybody's health is an if, like, so, but if Embiid is healthy and we have a decent team around him, like, that's the level of championship equity that he's always chasing. And if you remove Embiid from it, like, good luck getting someone who puts your ceiling as high as he does. And I think that's just how Morey views team building.
I think you're right. I think they offer it, and I think he takes it. I actually would be fairly surprised if he didn't. The Toronto Raptors, which are, well, they're both of our team, but they're my team to go through. This division has a lot of, with the exception of the Celtics, just because they're done. Like, this was a very, like, division has a lot of, like, pivot points. But Toronto's notable free agents. Bruce Brown has a team option. The reports say they're going to pick it up, which that will impact what we're going to talk cap-wise. Emmanuel Quickley is a restricted free agent. Gary Trent Jr. is also a free agent. His cap hold, by the way, is astronomical. It's like $28 million almost. He's not. I'm going to go out on a limb and say he doesn't get.
He might get half that.
Yeah. So their cap situation, they could get $230 million if they renounce basically all of their own free agents, except for Emmanuel Quickley, who of course has that smaller cap hold because he is a restricted free agent. I just don't. I'm projecting them to have. I honestly think that it makes more sense for them to operate over the cap, use the non-taxpayer MLE, and you also have the room exception there. That's what I'm projecting them for. Before we go further, would you agree?
Yeah. What do they got to do to get there, though? Is it just because the way I'm looking at it now, if you don't have Trent back and you don't have, who's the other guy?
Well, you know what you do is you just sign, you put Quickley's real number on the books. Like,
I see. Yeah.
You put Quickley's number on the books more quickly.
That. And then, right. Yeah. That's how you get there, obviously. And then do we talk about, like, I agree. If you can, I think it makes more sense for them to access the full mid-level and then have the room exception.
We know what they need, like shooting. They could probably use like a different type of a floor. Like Quickley and Barrett and Barnes are great, but they could use another type of playmaker. And then everyone knows I'm not a Jakob Poeltl guy, and I promise it's not just because of the contract. I know they have Olynyk here. They could use like a different type. Like, they need some diversification up front, and they have it on the roster in Chris Boucher. They just refuse to adequately unleash it.
Won't acknowledge it. It's a real shame.
But what were you saying before I interrupted?
No, I was just going to say, because who are you going to get if you preserve cap space? Like, how's that going to be?
Who are you going to get that's worth more than the non-taxpayer mid-level that you actually want to give?
Nobody.
Like, maybe you want KCP.
Yeah.
Like, if you would prefer him over Bruce Brown, like, I kind of get it.
Yeah. But yeah. So I think the next thing to talk about with them is what's the number for Quickley, assuming they're going to, depending on the time, I guess the timing of that deal is what's going to affect how they operate, whether under or over the cap. But like, what's that number going to be? Because I feel like we've had reports of, like, he might want a deal around 30 to 35 a year. We've heard that the Knicks offered something like 18 a year, and I
said it over under at 28 when I did it with Brian Toporek. I think I said it at 28. I might have already forgotten. I apologize.
No, well, that's in the. I mean, we may have done this exercise too, and I just can't remember. But
his max, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, his max in year one would be $35.3 million. If he gets a 4-year max from the Raptors, it's $157.9 million. A 4-year max from anybody else would be $151.6 million. I mean, like, the 5-year max would be 204.5, but if he gets a 5-year max, his agent is one of the best agents of all time.
Yeah, that 28 feels okay to me. Although, like, again, this is another situation where, as the reverse, like, OG went the other way and the Knicks needed to have a fairly firm idea of what it was going to cost to keep him. Certainly the Raptors had some number in mind, and Quickley's camp was cool with it, or at least I guess. I just wonder, 28, 30, maybe. I get uncomfortable into the 30s.
That's what I was going to say. 30 and under is, like, even 30 would make me a little queasy, but he's really good. And he's going to have an opportunity to develop his live dribble decision-making as an actual point guard, playmaker, whatever, that he just wasn't going to have in New York because of Jalen Brunson and the type of units he would play within. So I think I'd be comfortable with that number. I'm going to take the over of 28 million. And if they go under, that might be end up being one of my favorite contracts of the offseason.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting one. Sorry, I cut you off before we got to the rest of the rundown here.
No, I think I wanted to stop and talk about the Quickley number. Do you think that they'll bring back Gary Trent Jr.?
I mean, we're going to get into this, so I'll jump the gun a little. They do need shooting because that's just, if you're going to play Poeltl and you're going to play Scotty Barnes and you're going to play I mean, RJ Barrett, unless you believe that the just
Well,
shooting works better north of the
Scotty
border.
Barnes and RJ Barrett made sure, and RJ Barrett specifically, obviously Scotty Barnes was only in Toronto, but RJ Barrett's shooting turned in
Right.
Toronto. I think
But
they
do you
did great.
believe in that is the question.
No, I don't. I think that's the part I believe in is his efficiency and frequency at the rim. They got him, a lot of the times, not that he was operating from a dead stop in New York, but like he kind of was. And like they got him moving, like catching on the move or just being on the move in general, which I think is a big deal. But they need, and Grady Dick, I'm a big believer in, and I was a believer in it. And then Samson Folk wrote a piece this offseason on him. Even more believer in Grady Dick now. But like you do need, but I think they need shooting from someone who doesn't have like, Gary Trent Jr. has something worse than tunnel vision. Like, what would that be? Just like he's like blind.
Like pinhole vision, like telescope vision. No, that's almost sounds good. Telescope vision. What's like a really narrow thing you can look through? Like those eclipse glasses.
Yeah. So I think they need to upgrade from that spot. But like, if he's only going to cost you around the mid-level, like, yeah, just baby roll that salary slot back into it. Like you do.
Yeah.
And he is on the best version of the Raptors. Like having him as coming off the bench is like, that's a good spot to be. But would you prefer, here's to get into it, just looking at the shooters on the market, who would you prefer on this team next year? Gary Trent Jr., Malik Beasley? Let's go through them one by one.
I mean, am I getting Beasley at less than like what? I mean,
they'd all be mid-level guys, is what we're assuming.
And you're assuming Trent is right around there too? Like we said, jokingly, half of his cap hold, which is like 14-ish, I think, looking at it. Would I rather have Beasley or Trent? I don't know. That's like a wash to me. If they're both the mid-level, I don't see a huge upgrade. I think maybe Beasley
a little bit better as an on-ball defender, but I also think that there's a chance Gary Trent Jr. is younger, might just be better. Gary Trent Jr. or Buddy Hield?
I mean, Buddy Hield to me is like I think I'd rather have Buddy Hield. I think I know that guy changes offenses with his movement shooting. Trent, I guess, kind of does that and is much younger, but I think I'd rather have Hield if it's mid-level money, all things being.
So I'm thinking Buddy Hield is probably a cap space guy. So I was also going to bring up Klay Thompson. Not that I think everyone's mentioning Orlando or Golden State for him or bust. But like, are any of those names like for you, like, do they move you enough to say, well, if we could just keep Bruce Brown, have the non-taxpayer, and bring back Gary Trent, like, does it move you enough? Like, no, we could get Buddy Hield or Klay Thompson if we go the cap space route. Do either of those guys move the needle enough for you to think in those terms?
Well, if it's a one-to-one thing, I guess demonstrably I'm not like over the moon about either side of those. But if it's Trent and those other things, or Thompson or Hield or whoever it is, I kind of like Trent and the other things. I like, but it's pretty close. Like, it's not an easy decision to me. Do you have a strong opinion one way or the other?
Oh, I think it's an easy decision. I'm not using cap space on Buddy Hield or Klay Thompson, let alone definitely not using it on Malik Beasley. And like who knows, like, just because I'm assuming that his team option is not going to get picked up in Memphis, Luke Kennard could just be super cheap. And that's someone who I would think would certainly fall into mid-level range. And you don't necessarily need as many minutes from him if you're grooming Grady Dick.
Well, that's what I was going to say. If you're high on him, then like, how much do we really need to be talking about? Let's go get a shooter.
Well, would be, and this is where Luke Kennard, Buddy Hield, even Malik Beasley, in addition to Trent, kind of fall short, is that they also, and this is a weird thing to say about this team, needs like another wing.
I know. Isn't that funny?
Like Klay Thompson qualifies as a wing. And so like, but I'm not going the cap space route. Like for him, you'll be getting rid of Bruce Brown, but getting rid of Gary Trent Jr. for Klay Thompson. And you'd still have the room exception, I guess. So like, that's the challenge here for them. So Najee Marshall, I would love shocker. I would love Najee Marshall in Toronto. Is there a team I don't love Najee Marshall for is they could look at if Caleb Martin's going to fall into mid-level. I think the only sub-star where it's making me think about going the cap space route, cap space and room exception versus let's keep some of our guys, have the non-taxpayer and could have the biannual too, is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope.
Yeah.
It's like if he's willing to accept a 2-year windfall and like the Nuggets are being cheap little chicken shits and won't match, that's the name that I stare at. Like, you know what? He's kind of like maybe a little bit bigger of a wing, but when you look at the size of Scotty Barnes and even RJ Barrett, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in here, just that not that I don't want to call him the dream acquisition, but he would be fantastic in Toronto.
And Monk being younger doesn't do that for you, just because you're not getting the defense, you're not getting the experience, the reliability.
No. Would this be a team? This doesn't really give you the defense, but that could take a flyer. I'm assuming they're costing non-taxpayer mid-level, or in at least one of their cases less, like the flyer on Tobias Harris or Gordon Hayward, as sort of they were in toxic. Well, what I keep quoting this from Caitlin Cooper because it's so perfect. They were in soul taxing situations, and that if you remove them from, the confines of Charlotte / OKC with Hayward or Tobias Harris in Philly, that they'll just be better. And maybe you're bringing them off the bench.
Yeah, much more so for Harris. I think Hayward we're kind of done here. I think with him as a rotation guy, it's starting to feel like.
Don't want a spouse here. You say that she is.
Oh, is she just gonna?
I respect that she claps back. She's basically inaccurate with everything that she says, but I respect the hell. I respect the hell out of it. Any like big men for like that you would, because they have Olynyk, they have Pirtle, they obviously have the one and only Chris Boucher. Is there? I'm not burning I don't think there's not like a big that I look at. Yeah, I don't want a reunion with Jonas Valanciunas if it's going to cost me the use of the mid-level here. But like, is there any one like big, like taking a flyer on? Mo Wagner would be interesting if Orlando declines his team option, but I don't see it. If they were going to go the cap space route, this would be batshit crazy when you have Pirtle. Like I say, a Hartenstein would be.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, that'd be great. Do you want to do a second lap with Precious Achua? Try that out again. Yeah, I don't like Goga Batadze wouldn't cost you much, but like
that's a good one.
I depending on which version of him is the shooting one real from a couple years ago, or is the rim protection, or maybe both, then like maybe there's your Chris Boucher analog. But sorry, we just have to marginalize Chris Boucher. Or
I haven't given thought to like, just because of Masai Ujiri's comments, I haven't given thought to like who would they consider trading for, because they don't feel like a team that. He didn't sound like they're ready to follow a traditional rebuilding path, but it didn't sound like, if Jared Allen's available and we think that we're not going to go it doesn't seem like a team that's ready to do something like that. And maybe that wasn't the perfect name, like insert even like bigger name, marquee name X, semi-marquee name X that becomes available. They just don't seem like they're ready for it. Could I see them do something if it's, it's costing you salary or maybe cap space, depending on like if Atlanta just wants to get off of DeAndre Hunter, that'd be interesting. I know you've mentioned the Andrew Wiggins thing with them. I actually hate that for Toronto when they already have RJ Barrett, but
he's from Canada. Didn't you know that?
Yeah, bring back Corey Joseph already, guys. What's going on here?
He's available.
So yeah, I'm perpetually higher on them than the actual product turns out to be ever since their championship. I do think we're headed down that route again. I will say this.
Oh, maybe so. Yeah. Well, it's easy to get excited just because they got enough young guys that they're kind of fun, and you can kind of like scribble out a rotation already. And the Bruce Brown piece of it, like as a trade chip, as a $23 million expiring salary, I think is, that's, you could get a little active there.
Does Keldon Johnson do anything for you for this team? I just thought of that name. I don't think it does. The shooting was a little iffy last year.
I mean, he does. Look, we've said again, ironically, the original Project 6'9" needs some guys that are 6'8", 6'9". So Keldon Johnson would kind of fit that bill a little bit. Do you think maybe Keldon Johnson is someone that we've Tobias Harris'd it a little bit? Like his stock has fallen a little too far in a very different way, but like he's not looking like a starter for the Spurs anymore. But like he still can do a lot of good things as like an attacker, as a shooter. Like, I mean, the guy was on, like, wasn't he on a Team USA? Like, not that long ago? They thought highly enough of him then.
Yeah, he's kind of interesting in the sense, I would agree with you. And it just feels like there's been a lot of different iterations in San Antonio over the past few years, and none of them have included, like, a premier setup guy.
Yeah. That's my favorite theory now of like, you can't judge a guy in a weird situation. You got to see him play somewhere that's he might be PJ Washington-ish, like get him on a real team where he's doing only the things he's good at. And suddenly, okay, this guy's got something.
I think I'm with you on that's the new, like, is that the guy we're going to see? Like, is he the new PJ Washington officially? Like the one where it's like, there's a curiosity where you don't think he's that good. The results show that he might not be that good or as versatile as you think, but you put him somewhere else and he is. I think that's the guy. Unless anyone else, that should be a podcast. The building the PJ Washington trade candidate team.
Oh my God, I think that's right. Who's the next? We're really going that deep. Who's the next PJ Washington?
Very quickly, since we have to get out of here, the two news notes that we definitely need to update from our Central Division look ahead. Pascal Siakam has officially re-signed with Indiana on a 4-year, $189.5 million. I think it's a contract, not an extension based off the wording. Any thoughts on, we had entertained, I predicted he was going to get a 5th year. So I view this as a win for the Pacers.
I think that's just, I kind of was more in like, this is what it'll be, because it's still the best offer on the market and it's still a max. So you can say that, but you don't have to do the 5th year because nobody out there is pushing you to go that far. And so Siakam can't say like, I can do better, because he could not have done better outside.
And I will say also, there's been a lot of framing from other fans, but like, I wouldn't have paid Pascal Siakam that much money for my team. To me, that says more about your team than Pascal Siakam. If Pascal Siakam isn't enough of a difference maker for your team to give him the max, your team sucks. Hashtag Golden State Warriors.
Right.
I have a Monty Williams take. He was dismissed by the Detroit Pistons with $65 million left on his 6-year deal. So he resets the coaching market and is just there for a year. Now, people are talking about he's a genius. I have a counterpoint. They're talking about how, look at all this money he's getting. He had to sit through 82 games worth of Detroit Pistons basketball. Was he actually underpaid by getting that 1 year, $76 million contract? Was he actually underpaid?
Oh man, discuss. I think my take is yes, he was grossly underpaid. He should have gotten twice that much to deal with that. Although he was like kind of partially responsible for it. I don't know how you're going to portion that blame between management, ownership, and the roster, but he gets a little bit. Can we please, Pistons and everyone else, do shit in order from now on, because they already hired Fred Vinson, which I think everyone agrees, like,
as great part of his staff, which is just like,
great assistant coach hire. Oh, maybe he's gonna take over in a couple years once there's not so much money left. So, like, objectively good hire, but like, you can't, just don't do this. Like, pick the head coach and then go get Fred. Even if you say, hey, Fred, here's this offer. We just got to put we need to put someone in charge first who hopefully wants to work with you. We'll come back to you. Even if it's just optics, like, do it in order, because it's not as bad as like the coach and then the top executive who decides who the coach is, like that kind of out of order. But it's still just like, come on, Pistons, like what you have to just like, let's pretend we're a functional organization that knows how to prioritize our moves. Like, let's do it in order. That's all I got.
You're killing me softly, I tell you. I don't have any. I mean, we'll see what James Borrego was mentioned, but like, how deep is he into negotiations with Cleveland and or the Lakers, who seem like their favorite is JJ Redick? I don't think you need. I think people over exaggerate how much you need a coach to go through the offseason. You need an elite executive, which they have, to go through the offseason. Everything you just said was 100% right, though. Can you just do shit in order? It's just, if you had to boil down a snapshot of this entire podcast, can you just do shit in order? And you know why we went in this order, Grant? I was worried more news was going to break, which is why we didn't do it at the top. But it did not. It'll probably break by the time this releases. But with that all said, are you ready to take us out of here?
I am. Thanks everybody for listening, for watching. As Dan said at the top, please help us grow the podcast wherever you're consuming it. Give us high ratings, review us, tell everyone you know about us, subscribe everywhere that you can. Participate to the extent you want to give us guess of players, you want to give us stat padding, which again, sorry, we will get back to those some point soon. Join our Discord. The link to do that is in the YouTube and podcast description. Same place you can find some merch. I am sporting the apologies to Jared Allen / Mitchell Robinson shirt.
You're always good about having your mug behind you too when you're not using it. Like, I really, that's real YouTuber influencer shit.
That's, I'm just playing the game. Thanks again, everybody. That's going to do it. Apologies, Jared Allen, even though it's crossed out on my shirt. Shouts Frank Ntilikina. Oh, I did it backwards that time.